Hello, and welcome to SCRS Talks, provided by the Society for Clinical Research Sites. My name is Jimmy Bechtel, and I'm the Chief Site Success Officer with the Society. Today, I'm joined by Josh Stent, who is the CEO of Momentum Clinical Research, here to share a little bit with us around how AI and integrated systems are starting to change how we approach clinical research operations. But before we get into the topic, I know everyone's probably really excited to hear from Josh on this. Josh, first, let's learn a little bit more about you, if you wouldn't mind sharing some of your background.
Yeah, thanks, Jimmy. Josh Stent, CEO of Momentum Clinical Research. I've been working in the sector now for 2.5 years, but prior to that, spent 10 years in the medical field, both in general practice, urgent care, and dentistry, integrating businesses and transforming digitally how they work. Over the last several years, I've brought that same transformational mindset into clinical research. And at Momentum, we've built a scaled network in New Zealand and Australia of 19 sites, where we run everything from first in human healthy volunteer phase 1 trials through to large scale phase 3 and phase 4 studies. And I think what I've realized on the ground here is some of the old ways of working can't keep up anymore. And watching the space that we operate in clinical trials, there's a significant amount of process and administrative burden that we can do a lot about by thinking in new ways about how we use technology.
That's great, Josh. And that's exactly what we're here to talk about today. AI is the hot topic amongst the industry right now, particularly at the research site level. So any insights we can bring to the enterprise will be helpful, I think, for everybody. And even in healthcare in general, we know that it's starting to find its way into a variety of different aspects in which we deliver care, but of course, in the clinical research arena as well. So from your perspective, where do you see the most meaningful applications of AI in our clinical research operations?
Yeah, I think, Jimmy, to touch on your point there, I think that what we're seeing is a lot of ideas about how AI can be used. So I want to just try and touch on today a few practical applications of what we're doing at Momentum and give everyone a bit of a point of view. So if we think about it being discussed in healthcare and the most meaningful applications, the era of reactive spreadsheet-based clinical trials operations is over. I think if we want to bring therapies to market at speed, we need to recognize that with the modern protocols, the complexity of those, we can't afford to be waiting for things like data queries to come in or milestones to be missed to figure out that something is broken in the process. So what I think we're seeing is a major shift from that retrospective observational to a proactive real-time management of the data. And that transition is not just about bolting on new software, it's about transforming, in my mind, the whole ecosystem. So rather than having siloed, fragmented database, we move to AI-driven environments that are resolving bottlenecks to ensure that they don't impact timelines. So if I think about what we're doing at Momentum, a couple of examples of that would be we've centralized all of the data into a kind of enterprise-level reporting data lake. And what that means is over the course of an evening, for example, we can run a script, some interpretive information through, say, the source data in order to understand where there are errors in that data and present those errors back to the team. So when they come in first thing in the morning, they can see any deviations to the protocol that might have occurred, anything that's been missed that specifically needs to be tidied up. That way, we're not waiting for a monitor to come and see us and then correct things historically. What that means for our sponsors is that they get much more predictability and confidence in the data. And it means that ultimately they're going to be able to get their products faster to market. It means that our team can spend more of their time rather than dealing with monitor queries, which takes a significant amount of time and I'm sure will resonate with this audience. But we can spend the time seeing participants and working on that next study.
And Josh, that's really a common theme. And that's what this is all about and something that we constantly find ourselves continuing to go back to and really need to focus on. And it's not AI replacement, it's AI augmentation. How can we augment and enhance the work that we're doing to free up our time from doing the remedial, redundant tasks, like you said, like monitoring and what goes along with that, so that the sites and the site teams and the patients can do what they need to do together to advance medicines and get things done a lot quicker. So I think that's really the main focus here is what applications, when we're looking at these, we ask ourselves, can go to do that so that it frees my time up to be more attentive and more present with my patients.
Yeah, I think I remember speaking to Rick at Real-Time, who a number of people will know when I first started in the sector, and trying to get an understanding of the utilization of our team's time and the time that it's spent seeing participants versus the time spent inputting data or doing other administrative tasks. And when we start to understand and report on some of that through these tools that we're using, we can see that sites are spending 20-25% of their time seeing participants and the rest is in processing. And how do we identify and break down those processes to create more time that ultimately creates more value?
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. And when we then take this into recruitment, speaking to patients, we know that based on data, anecdotally and subjectively and objectively, it remains the biggest, if not one of the biggest challenges in clinical trials. Josh, maybe talk a little bit about how you think AI can help sites and networks improve recruitment, from maybe identifying eligible patients more effectively to potentially affecting and streamlining really the pre-screening and outreach process.
Yeah, I think it might be quite good, Jimmy, to break this into two parts. So the first part is, if you think about the top of the marketing funnel. So one of the things that we identified early on is that when you start to work in the sector, having come from somewhere else, what you realize is that there's just an incredible amount of work that goes into solving problems for future patients. And that the process of being involved in a clinical study for a participant is, in fact, very safe. But so many people don't know about it. And part of the reason for that is because we historically have spent so much time from a recruitment point of view targeting the people that have been involved in a study before or that have been on a database or mining database to do this, rather than also spending time on the top of the funnel, which is creating awareness for people to get involved in studies. So the first thing related to AI is, as a consequence of being able to use AI tools, we have been able to significantly open the funnel from an advertising point of view to get people to put, say, one or two bits of information into a social platform that enables us to then make a significantly higher volume of calls to get people into the database. So for example, you might respond to an ad with 2 or 3 bits of information. That ad then pulls into our practice relationship management system. We're then able to quite quickly surface up a series of questions that you can go and answer related to your healthcare if you're new to us. Rather than asking you to fill out a huge form online where you traditionally would get bored and not get involved. Then as we run that through the system, we're able to appropriately segment who we're going to call first by lifting the people that have answered the most amount of questions or look like participants that have been involved in studies before to the top of the list. Because what we also know is that when it comes to healthcare and when you're dealing with older populations, people still want to speak to a human, right? We can't remove that from the process, but what we can do is trigger the right calls to be at the surface to make sure that we're optimizing our recruiters' time to make the appropriate calls first, and therefore being able to convert people into studies faster. So that, the other thing that we've been able to do with the database specifically is start to segment and break down the database into therapeutic areas. Then we can engage with those participants in the database by serving up really great content that talks to issues that they might be having or new research that's out related to their diabetes, for example. So the participants stay engaged and warm. So when we have a study that comes up that serves those particular participants, we're able to quite quickly automate a process that sends them some information and gets them involved in the study faster. So there's a couple of examples there. Ultimately, what this does is both create further awareness by getting people into the funnel, but then also enabling us to get to the right people faster. So we can recruit and keep our sponsors happy.
That's great, Josh. And again, it goes to speak to your point here. The message that we're trying to get across is this enhancement concept, this augmentation, this removal of redundant things. But it also goes, especially when you talk about your recruitment work and things you were trying to do, it also goes to speak to tailoring the message and the work and what's being done and how you're approaching recruitment to the patients and the specific patient population. It helps narrow in and maybe take some of the guesswork out of how do I bring what I'm trying to bring to these patients most effectively in a way that's going to be received by them, and how do I reach them most effectively? And it incorporates some of that more strategic approach around patient recruitment and identification into the recruitment process, thus, again, alleviating the work that might go into trying to formulate some of that.
I think that's right, Jimmy. And if you think about a lot of this stuff is more broadly, it's new to our sector. And I think because of some of the limitations of the CTMS products, as an example, being the core basis for clinical trials and not customer relationship marketing, we're able to accelerate some of those principles that you would find in a lot of other sectors and bring them to our own sector in order to engage and qualify people more quickly to get them onto those studies.
That's exactly right. That's what it's all about. That's what we're here to do. And any way we can do that more effectively and or more safely and with patients in mind, I think we're all on board with that. I want to talk a little bit about workforce here too, Josh. Clinical research, we know, is so process driven, and teams often carry a lot of the administrative burden at the site level. So let's talk a little bit about how AI tools can empower staff then and increase productivity without losing that human element, the expertise that we know a lot of these trials really depend on.
Yeah, I think, Jimmy, the thing that you pointed out there, which is critical, is the greatest asset that we have in our industry is our clinical professionals, the investigators, the nurses, the coordinators that are able to do the interpretive work when they've got a patient in front of them that no machine is going to be able to process. And yet we routinely subject them to this huge administrative burden that not only drains their time, but also can compromise our ability to get more participants in or their overall experience as they're left with that burden. Really, what we've been considering and what I think needs to happen is it's about rethinking the division of labour, if you like, between our incredible clinical teams and the machines. And what I see as being critical here is that when it comes to productivity and the processing of information, this isn't necessarily a job for AI, but more a job for what's called robotic process automation, or people might have heard the term RPA. If you think about what AI is doing, it's very interpretive. It's taking something and interpreting the information and saying, this is what you might do with that information, versus robotic process automation, which is literally taking a task and being trained on how to do that task in the same way that a human does. Ultimately, we want to preserve the human element to make sure that has been interpretive, doing quality checks and real-time auditing, but we can significantly speed up the process. And so an example of some of these things that we've been putting into practice every day would be setting up study templates. We've got 19 sites at Momentum. If we've got 5 to 10 studies on a site, we can effectively set up the study templates by getting RPA to push those study templates out so they're the same across every site. We can then do the work of loading up the contracts and then at the end of each day kind of checking against a contract to make sure that the invoicing is being done appropriately. We might have hundreds of open studies on at any one time, so to expect a coordinator or multiple coordinators to be able to kind of go in and understand from an invoicing point of view how each one of those things needs to be processed versus being able to do that in an automated way, then get AI to do the interpretive work to understand what's happened through the course of the day and spin up differences, which means that we can significantly reduce the invoicing burden, but also the accuracy of invoicing for our sponsors. Another good example is the work that we're doing on this with setting up pre-screening templates would be another example where we're able to get the RPA to do the templates across multiple sites rather than having to get somebody to go in and process multiple spreadsheets. The other one is the data entry into EDC. This takes such a significant amount of time. And while we don't want to be doing anything interpretive when we're moving information from one place to another, the most basic thing is being able to move what is source data that somebody's put into the source into an EDC, which is simply a task of moving data from A to B rather than something specifically interpretive. So we don't necessarily want AI making those interpretive decisions. We want a human to be able to be in control of that. But for our sponsors, ultimately what it results in is a significant reduction in human error. And it means for patients and our participants that are involved in the studies, they get much more face-to-face time with our professionals who can spend time taking care of them, helping them to learn about the disease rather than our staff staring at screens all day.
Those are interesting examples, Josh. What I heard from that, and I guess the message I would help our audience understand is first taking the time to identify, okay, what are the capabilities of AI, which are understandably valuable to know, but also separate from then how do I apply that? Where do I apply AI and automation and empowerment versus where do I need to remain in the loop? And you use that word interpretive. And I think that's where we need to continue to rely on our staff is that, again, as you mentioned, that interpretation part of it. Allow AI or some other AI-based tool to do the work and do the execution and the remedial task associated with it. But when it comes to interpreting what the outputs are, that's where we need to keep the quote unquote human in the loop, is a common term in this space, to analyze and understand and apply the information that we're able to gain from those tasks as examples that you mentioned.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Jimmy. I think where people go wrong is first trying to identify and understand the problems that you're trying to solve, and then think about the right application to solve that problem. And then overlay the human element, which is AI's anything or RPA or any of these tools is only as good as its briefing, and then only as good as your ability to question everything about the response that you get to ensure that the data is accurate and the process is correct. What we did was just go through an exercise of understanding where are the manual hours that have been applied that could be better spent somewhere else. How do we think about ranking and stacking those hours? And then how do we get the appropriate teams together to think about what the solution might be? Because the other critical part is then starting to prioritize. What are you going to do first in order to get the most gains? But also, what are you going to do first that might not be as impactful until you get your head around how to do some of this stuff, which means that if you get it wrong the first time, it has a minimal impact. So those would be a couple of just follow-up points.
Great points. I couldn't agree more. I want to talk a little bit about integration here, because at its core, whether it's AI or some other tool, integrating these into our day-to-day is an important part of the success of these tools, but oftentimes a major issue and a major roadblock. We see these systems, especially when sites and networks begin to grow, become more and more fragmented. So why is that integration so critical for networks that want to continue to scale while maintaining a degree of consistency and high quality?
Yeah, I think about the biggest barriers to scaling networks, as you've said, it's really the disconnected, fragmented technology stacks that create variability and risk, but also in the short term, create a significant amount of manual work that can create confusion for sites that are coming together on an integrated world. I think if you want to achieve speed and quality at scale, you've ultimately got to reduce the number of control points where processes fail or where manual intervention is required. So the way, again, it's not too dissimilar to the point that we talked about just now, Jimmy. The way to do that, I think, is to really map the entire value chain from start to finish, right? So if you think about where does a clinical trial start? It starts at a feasibility, or it starts at a lead from a CRO or a sponsor direct to talk about a particular protocol. It moves through feasibility, through to site selection, to site initiation, and then it gets handed off to an operational team where you go through the regulatory process of getting things start up, you set up a study template, you create a source before you start to brief a recruitment team potentially on how they're going to start filling the study, right the way through to some of the things that we've touched on in terms of what you're doing at a site. And so I think by understanding that journey for a participant and for the site, you can understand where you as an organization lack visibility or control at a particular step or lose sight of information. So one of the things that we identified was that the handoff from the BD feasibility team to startup, we lost sight of a lot of that information, and therefore it might slow down a process. So being able to kind of create a system that talks to the sales function, which enables you to manage and maintain control of that, the visibility, it means that you can be faster and brief your teams more effectively while also keeping your sponsors engaged. Ultimately, if I think about kind of wrapping all of that, what it does is it provides you with your ability to understand the things that you need to influence first, but also manage your sponsors more effectively through that journey.
Thanks, Josh. It's all about taking the time to map, like you said, map it all out, chart your course, and see where the systems are going to make their way into your operations, understanding how that's going to play out, and then what the long game is for all of that work, taking a second and assessing the whole picture rather than a system by system solution type of process. It sounds like something that anyone looking to venture into this space would definitely need to do. But looking ahead, Josh, how do you see AI and these integrated systems, that concept we just talked about, working together to improve a lot of the key parts of the trial life cycle for both sites and for sponsors?
Yeah, I think ultimately, like we've talked about, the future of clinical trials isn't doing things a little bit faster. It's fundamentally thinking about how we redesign the life cycle to become more connected, continuously optimize, and get these products to market faster for our sponsors and for the patients that are out there waiting for them. And when you combine some of the AI-driven work with some seamless system integration, ultimately you're able to unlock a true end-to-end view of feasibility, startup, and the continuous monitoring that happens on a daily basis. And the way that you ultimately do that, which is our entire sector is built on, is data, right? And so when you think about the value chain and being able to understand that value chain, being able to pull all of that data into a single place that enables you to significantly reduce recruitment times, understand who's likely to perform better on a study than otherwise, have invisibility of startup times for your sponsors, ultimately is the thing that's going to significantly change the way that we bring products to market. And if you think about it from our customers' point of view, what are they looking at? And there's some interesting stuff recently about what is a CRO looking to do? Are they looking to spend less time with CRAs out at sites monitoring? They're looking to run their own tools over specific sites to understand who's recruiting and performing better, and therefore should be awarded specific studies. And at the highest level, what the sponsors are trying to do is free up their own capital by spending less days trying to get product to market, and therefore being able to reinvest that into some other great new therapies that a patient out there is waiting for. If I think about some examples again of what we're doing here at Momentum to deliver that, we're sucking all of the data from the various systems into a single data lake, and then being able to query that data lake on a frequent basis to be able to pull reports that we can provide to our sponsors or our customers, or being able to look at participant groups that might be appropriate for a particular study. So I think ultimately what this all leads to, Jimmy, for our sponsors, it's going to radically accelerate timelines and yield higher quality data. For our patients, it's going to mean a smoother supportive journey from screening all the way through to study completion. And we're going to, for our teams and our staff, we're going to be able to spend more time in front of those patients, providing the care and educating them on their particular disease while spending less time on all that terrible administrative burden. So I think ultimately we're really redefining how drugs are going to be brought to market.
I couldn't agree more, Josh. And I think that's a really excellent place for us to end our conversation here today. The opportunities are there, and it's really exciting. You described a lot of kind of win-win-win scenarios here that we can unlock through the power of tools that are based in artificial intelligence. And it's really exciting to see not only what's being done, but also, again, what is possible using some of these tools. So thank you for spending some time shedding some light onto not only what you're doing, but what you're seeing and what you're hearing in the industry and where we're headed with these really great tools. So again, thank you for being here with us today.
Awesome, Jimmy. Thanks. Appreciate the time. And yeah, look forward to catching up again soon.
That sounds great. And for those that are listening, we look forward to continuing these discussions, highlighting other important pieces of information and shedding some light onto the future of artificial intelligence and its application into our industry. For now, thanks for listening, for tuning in, and until next time.